Hey Void, it's Merwin, and today I have another plotting video for you, but this time it's about dark romance specifically. Before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's watched my videos so far. It's really kind of surprising, I guess, that so many people have commented nice things, and it's encouraging. It's very motivating for me to keep writing, to keep making videos, and I really appreciate it. I hope that I can bring some value to you. Following up my last video, this is just another plotting method specifically for dark romance. And I kind of put this together from several sources. One, Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody. I talked about that a lot in the previous video, and you'll want to know about that to use this system as well. And also Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes. So Gwen Hayes' book was fantastic for writing a romance book, but of course, dark romance and romance are not the same thing. And so I was really struggling to decide where to put those dark beats, but still have the romance arc. And I needed a plot so that I could plug in these different elements that I wanted because that's the sort of person I am. So if you want to write dark romance but are kind of overwhelmed as to where to put the tension plot points, I've kind of worked it out to the best of my ability, and now I'm going to share that with you, and hopefully it might help you. Take what you want, leave what you don't. I will have a Google document linked below that'll have the beat list, also some just general dark romance tips that I tell myself when I write, and also a quick list of just generalized dark romance tropes. That way you can maybe plug those into the index, which I talked about in my previous video, or you can just use that to kind of get you started or maybe creatively inspire you. I'm also working on creating a randomizer list so that I can do a plotting video for the channel where I kind of do all the tropes on random. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so the key things that I took from Romancing the Beat was the meet cute and the grand gestures and the fall in love beats, because even when they're kind of being horrible, you have to have these redeeming qualities to keep the protagonist hooked to this relationship despite what her best interest might be. But then we'll also have things like the no way beat, where they'll push back against whatever is going on in the plot. So we have to keep hold of those. The no way beats are also very important from this system, where we have the protagonist fighting back against the love interest. And fighting back can look like many different things. Internally, I don't want to fall in love with him. Externally, no, I won't marry the king, whatever it needs to be. Ideally, you want both because you'll have your character's misbelief, and I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but the no way beats will have something to do with your character's misbelief, which, if you followed my system that I talked about before, you should already know, which does make it a little bit easier going forward and plugging these things in before you start drafting. I used a Save the Cat to map out the plot twists and major key points to keep it flowing at the right pace. Then I just added thriller/suspense beats in between to hopefully keep the readers kind of following this up and down curve, which dark romance seems to do and what hooks us to the story so greatly. Now I'm going to briefly go over the points, not going into too much detail because I'm going to assume that Save the Cat Writes a Novel, so that a lot of these things should just kind of click into place for you, but I do want to highlight some of the key things that I added. This guide isn't a rule or a standard, especially since I piece these things together. I find that I need a map to get going so that my creativity can flow without the pressure of, is this good? Because at least the pacing is good. That's enough motivation for me personally to pursue through the harder bits of writing, through, oh, I don't know what goes here, because that you're hitting these points no matter what. And also, if your writing doesn't fit into the dark romance genre, if it's dark fantasy romance, if it's mafia romance, just mix and match things. Go read other craft books for different genres and just put those plot points into your outline, and you might find something that works perfect for whatever you're writing. Okay, so following along with me, whether it's right here on the screen or if you downloaded it from the link in the below area, just like regular, we start with the opening image, opening scene. Remember, we're going to want to mirror this as closely as we can at the final scene to show misbelief turned into what she learned throughout the story, whether this is a bad thing or not. I want to say right here, this is a dark romance, so you need to decide whether your character is going to have a positive or negative arc. And a negative arc doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad character, right? Some of my favorite stories, they go from good person to villain to be with the villain, right? But the actions the character takes are justified, and maybe the villain arc feels good. So you could go from positive morals to ending in a misbelief, which is maybe a truth, depending on how you write it. She might find that her country has been slaughtering people and now she has to kill her commanders, right? But now technically she's the villain of her people. So it's best to decide that as soon as possible, because a dark romance can have so much morally gray characters in it that we can root for, and sometimes that's the most fun. So when I say misbelief turned to truth, I don't necessarily mean a bad belief turned good. It could be a good character turned bad, a morally gray character turned worse, whatever you want to do. But in that first scene, you want to show their emotional state, their current state of life, and then whatever that misbelief is, or whatever that thing is that you're going to change about that character. You want to highlight that. You want to provide empathy. If you start a scene with a woman being married to somebody she's never met, but you know nothing about her, you might be invested because that's so shocking and like, come on, we all love that. But it would be more to know that she has 3 little sisters at home who are starving that need money from this marriage. You know, that's a completely different thing than just somebody getting married. So hook the reader as soon as possible. You also want to set the tone. That doesn't mean she has to be in a dark, scary house, but you definitely want to show the potential for this to be a dark romance, or at least foreshadow at there being something interesting happening or something dark upcoming. Now, introduce the romantic interest. This could be through foreshadowing, through that way. Maybe your reader doesn't know the moment they read this, but later on they'll be like, okay, got it. Theme stated. This is where we're going to highlight your protagonist's reasons for not falling in love with the love interest. So maybe they have moral standards, right? She's a priestess daughter. You know, she can't date anybody from the dark magic side. I'm just making stuff up now. You know what I mean? Or she's sworn to somebody else, you know? Or she will never take a man to her bed because she was betrayed when she was 22. You know, whatever the thing. This is where we're going to highlight the conflict of the story. This is different from your character's misbelief, or perhaps it's the same thing. Maybe that is her misbelief. Maybe the misbelief is I've never been worthy of love because she's an orphan. So that's going to stop her from not having interest in the love interest when they show up. And in a dark romance specifically, this usually involves something traumatic or past betrayal that makes them very vulnerable. Something to do with war or poverty or abuse. This past event could also be something that bonds the two together eventually, because they could have a shared, event that highlights their romantic arc, because they've been shying away from that from the beginning. So that's something to consider. Okay, then the inciting incident, which should be sending the protagonist into the orbit of the love interest. It should also include external stakes or danger, like I'm being sent into the enemy territory, or I'm being sent to outer space, or he's a bloodthirsty vampire and I'm a little human girl, whatever it is. Usually it's, a deal, a marriage, a bargain, whatever. I've listed some tropes in that document below if you need some inspiration for this. Okay, then we have a no way beat, which is where the protagonist finds a way to steel herself or himself against the love interest. It should show tension, distrust, and conflicting goals between the two of them, reasons why this is not going to work out. After this, we're going to want to add a thriller beat or a horror beat or whatever tension element is going to escalate the situation. You could introduce a secondary antagonist that is bad for both of them. You could make the love interest worse than he was before, and that could threaten the relationship or the mission in general. Then at 25%-ish, you're going to break into Act 2. This is the point of no return. This is when Harry Potter goes to Hogwarts. It's a new environment, a new system. She's gone off to the new country with her new husband. She's gone to the underworld. There's a new situation, a new thing, a new goal, just like in any Act 2. She's generally forced to team up with the love interest, whether it's enemies to lovers thing, a blackmailing, whatever it is. This is where the central romantic relationship is established and the stakes are clearly established to the reader, and we know what the protagonist's goal is going forward. She should feel like she has some agency in this, some sort of choice. She has to go or her country goes to war. She has to go or it's her sister that goes. Something like that. Okay, fun and games. Deliver on your dark romance premise. Go to the tropes you like, the banter, the horror elements that you like. This is where you're going to layer in all that fun. But I implore you, because you have romance and the dark part, you kind of want to keep your reader going back and forth in these. You want to build tension if that's your thing. You can add spice here if that's your thing. You want to keep the stakes rising while letting your readers have fun, whether that's through spice, through the tension-filled moments, or through the mafia scene romance. Okay, at your midpoint twist, it is a false victory or false defeat, like in any other plot structure. A lot of times this might be a first kiss if it's a slow burn, the first spice scene if it's a little bit faster. It's going to reveal changes to how the protagonist thinks, generally changing her goal going forward. The clearer you can make that, the clearer it's going to feel like a shift to the reader that's going to make sense. This could also be a betrayal. It could be the protagonist finding out that the love interest killed her best friend, but we don't know the reasons yet, but we'll say it's justified later on. Or he sent an army to attack her country and she didn't know about it. You know, it doesn't have to be the good thing. It can be a false defeat. The next beat is your bad guys close it. External and internal stakes should increase, pushing both the external plot forward. Now, when it comes to dark romance, you can have more external plot or more internal plot focused on the romance. You know, you can have more plot or more romance, depending on what your style of writing is. So just balance that out how you would. I don't have an advice for you on that. I prefer a heavier plot. I know a lot of people who prefer a heavier romance. So that is stylistic. Either way, depending on your midpoint, whether it was a false victory or a false defeat, you're going to go on an upward or downward path towards your ultimately bad time for your protagonist and the climax of your story. You can go the other way if you want. You don't have to listen to me. That's just general advice. Okay, so what do I mean by upward or downward path? So remember what I said, how we want to keep our readers going like this, ideally. I like to use my hands a lot. So if it's a false victory, you're going to want to go on a downward path. So they do it for the first time, but then after that, she hears him talking about sending plans against her country. And maybe there's a good reason. Once again, we don't know it yet. So things are kind of getting worse, and she's getting these seeds planted in her head, right, about him. Or maybe he's being more violent, or whatever it is that you're writing about. So if it's a false defeat, maybe she then starts spying on him, and she starts to see all the good things he's doing. And maybe she was wrong. And that is going to get our readers going, going on the upward path where we will then crush them in another way. So they're either pulling apart or growing closer because of the danger, depending on these paths. Now we're going to have another romance beat. It can be like a dark romance spicy beat if it's a downward path. It could be a moment where they share about their past trauma that we talked about that makes your characters misbelief at the beginning. We're going to have a romance beat here. That back and forth wishy-washy. Okay, now we have the all is lost beat. So something is going to happen that breaks the fragile bond between them because they've been going back and forth now. So something with the plot, it could be a miscommunication, but that's my least favorite trope. I know some people like it. There needs to be something with the plot that makes the protagonist have to come to face her misbelief or their lack of morals since being with the love interest. The plot should reach a crisis. The antagonist should get a major win, or the protagonist should suffer a major loss of some sort. The love interest might betray the protagonist or seem to, or the protagonist makes a choice that makes the love interest no longer want to be with them or leave. Okay, now we have the Dark Night of the Soul beat, which you guys probably know all about. The protagonist is at their lowest point. They're going to confront everything they've done that have led them up to this point. That's important. You want them to know that it's what they've done. If they don't feel like it's what they've done, it might be hard for the reader to connect, or at least in my opinion. They have to let go of whatever that theme is to survive, or maybe they even compromise their morals or recognize that they're not the person that they thought they were. When we break into Act 3, the protagonist makes a decision that should end the story. So they're taking charge of the situation, going after the love interest, going after the bad guy, whatever the situation is. This isn't much different than any other story. The climax or the grand gesture. This should be both in a romance thing. Even if it's a dark romance, in my opinion, we still want to swoon over him, even if he's doing the big M word to people. So hopefully the protagonist and the love interest must work together to defeat the antagonist. And this could be the grand romantic gesture in itself because they pushed each other away. They have to protect or save each other or haul the other back from the edge of some even mental cliff. In a dark romance specifically, this includes high stakes, maybe even physical bodily harm, the destruction of a city, anything you can think of. closing image. So this could be a happily ever after or a happily enough for now with some dark foreshadowing if you plan on adding a second book, or that's just your vibe because dark romance allows that. You want to wrap up the external plot and show the growth of the character, mirroring that first scene if you can, highlighting the change, especially if it's a negative one. I'm a big fan of that. It's not very different from Save the Cat Writes the Novel, but it is kind of nice to have a zero draft that tells you where to put the romance beats. I think it would definitely help you draft quicker and more efficiently and kind of figure out where you need to put more tension or where you need to add like more sweet stuff, because I really think that the key is just to provide that back and forth tension. However long you want to make those hills and valleys is up to you, the author, and your personal flavor. And that's what makes it so fun. Thank you so much for watching. I hope it helps you. I have a few other plotting structures, one for dark fantasy, and then I'm working on one for literary fiction, specifically women versus the void fiction, because that's what I need and that's what I want to use, and I really want to get a negative character art template down. So I'll share those soon. And also, I'm going to share the system after I get it put together of how I'm going to read my draft 1 and then go forward with taking notes on that so that I can start draft 2, which I will be vlogging on this channel. Remember to like and subscribe so that I will be pushed out into the ether. And thank you so much for being here. Bye!